part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 283, the Sifo-Dyas character dissection. And this will be a follow-up of sorts to episode 282 for that was our Dooku Jedi Lost show, as we felt that there were some developments around Sifo-Dyas that were very intriguing and maybe called to question yet again some practices by the Jedi Council that we'd like to get into. So with me tonight and still wearing his ancient Jedi arm wraps, please welcome Jonesy back to the show. Jonesy, welcome this evening.
I appreciate it. I had to take out a moment from my rituals, but it's well worth it to be with everyone today.
Yeah. We've got some news that we'll get into, and then we'll get into some Sifo-Dyas stuff. And I think we're going to really try to tackle the age-old question of how the heck did this guy get on the Jedi Council? So we've got that in store for you in just a little bit. But first off, there is a small con that's coming up called Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim. This was just announced. Was that yesterday? 2 days ago?
Yeah, yesterday. Right.
We're recording this on the 14th of June. So yeah, just a couple of days ago. But it's looking like we're going to be back there August 27th. Well, I don't want to presume anything, but the Star Wars fandom will be back there August 27th to the 30th, 2020 at the Anaheim Convention Center. And we've got the pricing, which is pretty daunting for the VIP.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. $900. So yeah, everyone's lining up for that one, right?
Yeah.
I think it was, what was it, $750 this past year?
About that, yeah. And it's sold out, and this will probably sell out.
Oh, absolutely. And in probably 20 or 30 minutes, it'll all be gone. There's a huge list out there. We'll link it in the show notes of all the perks. They give you a lot of stuff, especially if you want to spend more money at the store. I think the first half dozen or 8 are all centered around the store of exclusive lines, early access. The preview night, you probably noticed, is only 4 days this year.
I saw that. Thursday
through Sunday. It sounds like maybe the preview night might be exclusive to Jedi Master VIP. So there's a few items in their list that are, come back later, check in later. They'll have more details around that. But there's a couple interesting ones in there, like the Jedi Master Concierge, which is, super fancy. That's what we should call ourselves. We missed our opportunity.
Oh, that's true.
Basically someone that helps you plan your trip, or you can listen to us and maybe bribe Utini or one of our other listeners that have come up with these great workbooks and worksheets to help you plan your trip once everything comes out.
For us,
we work
fraction
for free,
of the
folks.
cost. Yep.
We're free of free. It's a pretty long list. You get all the goodies, of course. There's lanyards, and there's I think some cups and some patches and all that good stuff.
All the rest, the typical stuff. Yeah, $900 is not a drop in the bucket by any means, but again, we know that that's going to sell out, and I'll probably kick myself once we get there. The store is interesting as well. That a lot of those, you'd mentioned, a lot of those perks are kind of focused around the store itself, but in reality, I think I went in there thinking, I'll drop maybe $100. I think I dropped almost $350. So well over what I had planned on spending there. Because
you could have saved 10% if you would have been a VIP.
$35. That's right. I could have got that little plush Darth Maul thing for one of my kids free.
It almost paid for itself.
Exactly.
There's some other cool things. I mean, you get the exclusive poster with the poster tube, which everyone was looking for when they were buying posters.
True.
So,
True.
Yeah, some of that stuff is useful.
The lotteries are back.
Yeah, lotteries are back, and I don't think this is a bad thing, though, right? What do you think about them this past year?
Well, and I had no context. I'd never been to one. I don't know what it was like to not have a lottery system. Just from the outside looking in, and somebody without any kind of prejudices or of whether this is a good system or not, or what worked or what didn't, it seemed like it worked fine to me. I didn't have a problem with it, and it seemed civil. Everybody, you got in. And to be quite honest, there were, how many of those did we go to where we didn't even have a stinking pass? We just went and got in line, and they weren't checking, and we got in, right? So did I say that on the air? Should I have said that in the air?
Probably not.
All right. Well, that wasn't me. But no, I didn't.
The other Albert.
It's the other Albert that was.
And you're right. Except for a couple of instances where they shut the feeds off and didn't share, you could see everything from the Star Wars show stage. And so even if you didn't get in, you still had a place to go watch it, especially for Rise of Skywalker. In the really big ones,
yeah,
you still had places to go and to be able to be there with your friends, even if you got separated or you had kind of different groups going. So at least you had that to fall back on, which I think really did work okay. And all things considered, it managed the lines pretty well. They kept things moving. We only had a couple of hiccups, I think, throughout the entire process, if I recall. Further we get down the road, of course, the better the memories get, right? But overall, yeah, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it sounds way better than camping out for 12 to 15 hours in the cold and or the heat or whatever it is. And I don't know, talking to people.
Yeah.
Why would you want to be social?
Exactly. What's wrong with these folks? All right. Well, we'll keep that. I mean, we really don't have a whole lot just outside of the initial pricing, the dates, that kind of thing, but we'll certainly be checking in.
Yeah. Ticket prices, the regular ticket prices, right? The 4-day ticket is right around the $200 range. Again, it depends if you do it earlier versus if you get it at the door, which is kind of haha at the door because they didn't have any at the door this past year. But they go on sale Friday, June 21st at noon Eastern time. And interestingly enough, the hotel blocks open around the same time on Friday, June 21st again, but an hour later at 1 p.m. Eastern. So all of that in the same day. I can't remember if that was the case last year, but that's actually a really close window. And we did a cursory scan of some of the hotels around the area because I was in Anaheim last summer, and I stayed at the Anaheim Hilton, which is right behind the convention center there. And so I looked there, and they don't let you book a whole year in advance, or a year plus in advance. They let you book right around a year in advance. Not everyone's got all of their fares published quite yet, but we are hearing people already finding rooms and booking them.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting.
We'll get ready for that. Let's talk about, I guess, the other thing that we've got, at least on the list here. They have announced, this is the 1UP company, Arcade 1UP. They now have a Star Wars trilogy arcade cabinet that's coming out. So if you have not been following Mike Rondo on any of the social media stuff, he's a pretty avid fan and collector of the 1UP arcade machines. These are the miniature, I mean, they're not miniature, but they're smaller than the full-size cabinets. But yeah, They're still big enough where if you sat in front of it, you have to sit on a stool and that kind of thing, and you can kind of pick these up for $200-$300 usually. But they've announced the original arcade of Star Wars, and this is a 3-game one. So it's got Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and the arcade version of Return of the Jedi. So I don't buy these. I don't collect these. This is one I may pick up, and the only reason is for the Star Wars one. I don't mind the Empire Strikes Back. That wasn't really. It was okay. It wasn't that great, and I really don't like Return of the Jedi. It's one of the hardest games I think that they've ever released. So if you've ever played this thing, you know what I'm talking about. It's a kind of isometric, 3/4 perspective type view. And when we were at Celebration this past year, when we went up to Galloping Ghost Arcade, I confronted that machine again because I had some very horrible memories of it as a child. And I thought, okay, surely I was just really dumb, young, naive, and had lacked hand-eye coordination. And I completely failed again at this arcade. So either I've already peaked and I'm on the downside of it and I'm still uncoordinated and I'm just older now and I wasn't able to do it, or that game really is just a little bit challenging and difficult. But anyways, is this something that interests you? I know you're not really picking these up either, are you?
I like the idea of these, that's for sure.
Yeah.
In general, the Arcade 1UP, because I love Galaga. Of course, we talked about that on the basement before. So I would like to have some of these games. And if they there were a handful out there like NBA Jam or NFL Blitz. If they were to come out with those, I probably would pick some of those up as well. The Star Wars ones, these games were pretty hard, right? But I got to be honest, I might pick it up just so I can hear the original Star Wars game music in the background or hear it upstairs, like from a distance all the time, because that's one of the things I remember about that game, where it was just the music and the voiceovers. Yeah. The Force will be with you. I mean, just all of the effects that go with it. And it was the very first time we actually could experience being in an X-Wing and shooting at stuff and having, sounds from the movies and the approximation of some of these with the vector graphics. And those it just kind of rekindles that nostalgic feel, even if the game itself is, it's okay, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I might. I mean, it's the price point they announced was below $500.
$499.
Yeah, so unclear if that includes the riser Usually that's separate, but the quality of these things, what Mike has been telling us is the quality of these things have been improving since the very first set that was released. So the quality of the parts, the durability of them, the light up marquees. I mean, they were even shipping some of these things. The marquees were printed upside down or something. You couldn't fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of those things have been ironed out, and sounds like the general quality has improved to where they are definitely worth your money. And the parts, I think Mike had one with, what is it? Is it Centipede or something like that with the roller ball?
Mm-hmm. Trackball.
Yeah, one of those. And that wasn't maybe of the best quality, but those seem to have improved too. So they're getting there, right? Especially as you sell more units and you come up with more. And I think they announced a Marvel one as well, which is pretty neat.
Marvel, they announced the Ninja Turtles, the 4-player one, our old arcade from Konami. Yep. So
yeah, I love that game too.
Yeah. But I don't know. This is one that I probably, if I wouldn't probably pick all of these up. Just I don't have the real estate to put these things anywhere. We've got enough stuff in the house already. I'm trying to get rid of things. But if I had the room, I would certainly be picking these up. Although I'm kind of one of those people that really wants the original stuff. Like I like these. I think the idea is cool. But there's just something about buying the original, as crazy price as it is, and as much upkeep as they take. But to have the original one is kind of neat. But it's really hard not to not want to pick this up, given that most of these guys run around, $200-$300, with this one being a little bit more. And I will say the riser board and even the quality of the cabinet itself, like the graphics, the wrap that they've got on it is very reminiscent of the original. I mean, it's even got like this is like the original arcade ROM. It's got the original controller as well that's kind of built into it. So I don't know. You really can't go wrong with this, and I don't think so. Especially if you're a big fan of, and you've got a lot of those nostalgic feelings and experiences from having played the original one, especially like the sit-down one, which is a whole nother discussion we could go on about. But have you ever played it growing up?
Yeah, they announced a while back these countertop versions of these games, which I was hoping that they would have announced at E3. Maybe they did, and I just didn't see it.
Yeah, I think they did.
Right.
You sound like the coffee table ones, right?
Yeah. Well, no, not the cocktail table versions, but these actually sit like up on a bar. Like when you go to a bar, have the little TV touchscreen type of games. Yeah. They were like that size, right? They have a special name for them, but they're basically countertop type of deals.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and those are a little bit more interesting to me. One, maybe a little cheaper price point. I don't know that specifically, but you talked about real estate, right? You're right, man. They look great. So Mike's got a handful of these things lined up in his basement. And it looks awesome, right? You talked that we were at the arcade at Celebration in the Chicago area. That's awesome to have that in your house, right? That's every young boy's dream, is to start to build out an arcade in your house. And maybe a lot of young women too. But for us, that was like, that was just
living the dream, man.
Yeah. I mean, it meant you were like exceptionally wealthy beyond all imagination because these things are so expensive. But just to have that and to have your own arcade, and man, for it to be free,
exactly,
it would be amazing. Just seeing it is really cool. But I'd like to see them up on a countertop too, just so you have more flexibility about where you put them, especially if you've got a bar or something like that.
Right.
Maybe just set one on the end cap.
All right. Well, we'll keep. Mike will keep everybody posted. So check the feed. You'll certainly be seeing a concept. I think he's actually he petitioned those guys, or he's propositioned them to get a cabinet free or something. Now he's scheming something over there, I'm sure, to get a free one to evaluate. So hopefully that falls or goes through and doesn't fall through, and we'll have something to kind of come back and report on. But nonetheless, he probably will buy this. So stay tuned. You're going to hear all about it, whether you want to or you're not. All right, let's talk about the main show. This is kind of a continuation. If you listen to the Dooku Jedi Lost episode we did, we went over on time. I think we went well over on time than we anticipated. And we literally, I guess intentionally kind of pulled out all of the Sifo-Dyas stuff because we already had in our heads that we were going to come back and do a show on that. So what you're going to hear is some recap in a lot of areas of what exactly was happening with Dooku Jedi Lost, with more of a focus on Sifo-Dyas and the relationship that he had both with Count Dooku and his masters, and all the pain that he went through in this particular storyline. So let's start and talk about that relationship with Dooku, because for all intents and purposes, I mean, these guys were like best friends. You're gonna hear this. I'm gonna say this quite a bit, but I remember talking about this in the last episode. We said that these guys were very close. They acted like best friends, and you had no reason to believe that they weren't best friends or really close. And this relationship dynamic, it seemed to make sense in a lot of ways. You have somebody like Dooku who's extremely gifted. He's very gifted and talented in the Force, and yet socially, he's kind of an outcast, and maybe even he almost comes across as being unapproachable. And I think Sifo-Dyas makes a joke about him being almost regal, right, in his appearance, right? So with Sifo-Dyas, I kind of got the sense you had somebody who was well aware that he does not stack up to Dooku in any way, whether it's socially or in his use of the Force, physically, if you want to say that. And he seems like he was okay with all that. He almost comes across as like this royal servant that Dooku has that kind of just follows him around, right? This little patsy guy that just kind of follows around and does whatever he asks him to do. Am I off base in kind of getting that kind of impression from them?
No, as I was going through the book, and even now, it's really easy to ask the question, like, what was the connection between these guys?
Yeah.
What was that thing that brought them together?
Right.
Because it's not really all that clear.
And we don't get it. They jump into the book saying they're already buddies, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we get a little bit of an idea, though, right? Of that Dooku knows he's difficult to get along with. And I think one of the things that Sifo-Dyas did for him is that he is able to poke through some of that veneer, some of that polish.
Yeah, it gets him to come out of his shell a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, he kind of cracks the armor just a little bit from time to time, and he's able to pull that out. And I think Dooku secretly wants someone who can do that for him, even though he might not feel comfortable with it all the time. You know, there's always someone who we have in our lives that's able to help kind of bring us out of our shell or to show us the life that we kind of wish we could do a little bit, even though we know we're fully not capable of living that life in that way.
Yeah.
But Sifo's curiosity and some of those types of things, I think, are things that Dooku is interested in as well. And Sifo is his way of doing that. And quite honestly, so it's kind of his outlet to doing some of these more mischievous activities at times, even though he says he doesn't want to. Dooku has this natural curiosity as well, and Sifo is just the manifestation of it. And so he can, Dooku can almost tag along and think it's okay because, Sifo's really the one responsible for it in the end, right?
Yeah. And it is interesting. And another aspect of this relationship was Dooku, like, he never really felt, I don't think Dooku ever felt, threatened or even intimidated by Sifo-Dyas in any ways, nor I never felt like he had to prove himself to Sifo-Dyas. And to some level, I think you can make an argument that it's because of this, that he never had to prove himself, that he knew his place against him, that he never really, or I guess that allowed him to be really close to Sifo-Dyas more than maybe other people, if that makes sense. I mean, for whatever reason, Dooku admits that in the novel that early on that they were inseparable. So there was definitely a really great bond, a really close friendship between those two, which makes, again, it makes us, and we're going to get to this at the very end here, when Sifo-Dyas dies and how he dies, it just seems all the more tragic given where these guys came from. Before we go on, and I want to step out of the story a little bit, because there was something that did bother me just a tiny bit, and I may be nitpicking this a little too much, but when I listened to the audiobook, it didn't click until about halfway through, but his voice is not the same voice that we got in the Clone Wars. Like in that flashback scene with Yoda and the Vision, and it turns out to be Palpatine, and we can talk about maybe that's why. But that voice, that the actor that's doing the voice in that particular episode of the Clone Wars is almost using like this European accent that's non-British. It sounds like I'm not going to say Spanish. It's not Spanish, but it sounds like a Mediterranean type accent. And that's what I had in my head as I was, I've always thought of Sifo-Dyas because that's what I remember seeing. And yet when we get to this Dooku Jedi Lost, he's got a very proper British accent, played by an actor by the name of Sean Keenan, who's a very talented person all on his own. But did you pick that up, or did that bother you? Or am I just like looking into this way too hard?
We looked at the voices in general, and we had a challenging time getting on board with some
fair.
of them.
Yeah,
that's part of it. But you're right. I went to the Clone Wars episodes to read in the Lost Missions, which is the season 6 stuff that was released, I believe, directly to video or directly to Netflix. Right. I went and rewatched some of those because I remembered. I was like, okay, how far off is the voice, or how different is it? But the way that they portrayed it in Clone Wars is difficult to say. It wasn't really him, right? It was Palpatine. But also, how accurate was that? I mean, he was trying to play that he was in chains, he was sick, he was very weak. So there was a lot of interpretation that you could go from that of what does a stronger Sifo-Dyas sound like. You're right, there was some different voice inflection, but I mean, we had that with Dooku as well to an extreme, probably more extreme because we had a lot more content with Dooku.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit, but he was also very easy to understand from an audiobook, spoke very clearly. So did it match the appearance of the character that we've seen in Clone Wars? No. If you were to hear that voice with that visual of the character, they wouldn't line up very well.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's nitpicky. I think it's just, what we see and what we hear, they cast for the audiobook, not necessarily with a picture of this character right on their music stand as they read to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess, I don't know. As painstaking, as they go through great lengths to ensure a lot of this stuff is canon. There's consistency in the canon itself. It's just interesting that they didn't do that. But you make a good point because, you listen to Dooku in this audiobook and it doesn't sound like Dooku from the Clone Wars or the movies. But anyways, I guess so. One other thing too, I guess just on the surface here about their relationship, he very much trusted in Sifo-Dyas, especially given that early on he knew he was kind of breaking some laws and being mischievous and staying in communication with Jenza, and yet he doesn't. And we don't get anything here. There's no reason to believe that there is another conversation that happens or somehow this makes its way out of that little close circle between them two, but. He being Sifo-Dyas is there when Dooku opens up the holopad of the hologram thing from Jenza, and that's he mentions that that's a sister, and then you get the sense that Sifo-Dyas is like, whoa, dude, this is a little taboo, you can't be doing this kind of thing. Yet he trusts him. So again, there is a huge level of trust here, and we kind of get bits and pieces of that throughout the novel. It's just really unfortunate, I guess, is where I'm going with all this, is that, the way he dies and Dooku being behind all of that.
I'm glad you went back to it because the relationship they have, I think, is built on this. Sifo is very humble. Right?
Yeah,
and I think that's part of it, is that no one was really, everyone that didn't get along with Dooku wanted to prove themselves, or they had a chip on their shoulder and they didn't like the way they were jealous. There was always something, right, that makes those relationships difficult, especially when you're Dooku and you're better than everyone else. And Sifo looked past that and didn't feel like he had to compete. I mean, and even when they had to duel in the trials, it was still very much one of, I don't stand a chance. Right. And they formed this partnership of, we're going to finish this together. And even when he clearly was beaten, Dooku respected him enough to be able to do that. And I think that comes with a lot of humbleness and his approach to how he wanted to interact with Dooku and give Dooku as much of a chance as Dooku trying to reciprocate that and give Sifo a chance and somehow finding, forming this bond. And I think that just goes to Sifo's character, especially at that time, of really kind of being more outward with his focus rather than inward, which you could say really we had that with Dooku, but definitely the other characters like Arath, who just were insanely jealous about it and had tons of opinions that they had to share and make fun and poke fun and any kind of jab they could to take him down a notch. And Sifo just didn't care about doing that. Dooku respects that type of behavior amongst his peers because very few exemplify that.
You started touching on the mischievous aspects of Sifo-Dyas, and there's a great line in there where it's early on, Dooku's talking about Sifo-Dyas, and he mentions that he was likely to cause trouble as Dooku was expected to excel, saying that as his level of mischievousness, or if that's even a word, but his ability to cause trouble was on par with how good Dooku was at excelling in everything that comes with being a Jedi or initiate, a Padawan, that kind of thing. So that kind of speaks to it a little bit just right out of the novel. And we see this with Sifo-Dyas in egging Dooku on once they find that holo journal of Terradine, that the expelled Padawan. He's like really trying to get him to come out. He goes into at nighttime at the dormitory. And it tries to wake him up in the middle of the night, when they go look at the Bogan collection, that kind of thing. So there is that element. I'm glad you brought it up because I didn't have it in my notes. But yeah, I think you're 100% spot on here. This is somebody who really likes to do this, and Dooku, he may begrudgingly be like, oh, I really don't want to do this, yet inside of him, he really does want to do it, and that's why he tends to side with somebody like Sifo-Dyas, because he gets that adventure aspect, and it's his reason, it's his, I don't want to say a scapegoat, but it's his outlet to kind of go do those types of things when he himself, out of his own nature and his own character, probably wouldn't normally do that unless somebody was sitting on his shoulder like Sifo-Dyas telling him, yeah, come on, dude, you can do this. It's okay. We'll get in trouble. It'll be fine.
It'll be fun, right?
Right.
Yeah. So when Harry and Ron, Dooku and Sifo.
Yep.
Oh, did I go there? This was a very Harry Potterish type of moment, right? Which I think was fun. I mean, it was kind of cool, especially with the sand. It's really good for Sifo. You see this, you get this blend of both the research, you get the curiosity, but you also have this research and a little bit of cleverness of how to figure out how to unlatch the locks. And they're not the first to do this.
Right.
We find out later that their peers, their masters actually were the last ones to go and do this.
Castana did it.
Right. Yeah. Braylon and Castana. Right. And so it's fitting that, their next generation of Padawans are doing, or I guess initiates at the time, are doing this same type of activity and same type of behavior, and that they would associate with them, especially Lean and Sifo. I like that they go on kind of this little adventure though. And what else is as appetizing as learning about something you're not supposed to know?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's this really enticing, exciting, it's adventure. And you could claim that, the Jedi aren't supposed to want these things, but these are younger guys. These are, how old were they? 13 years old. So we'll just call them teenagers, adolescents. Their curiosity for these types of things, Darth Krall's lightsaber, right? And all of these mysterious things that, Lean kind of teased them about by dropping the book. But I like that Sifo is the one to kind of Indiana Jones a little bit and determine the clues and figure out how to crack it. But then he sees his deficiencies and brings Dooku in to be able to say, okay, here's what you have to do because you're really good at this stuff.
Yeah.
And I can't quite do all of this without you. Plus, hey, we're buds. Let's do this together.
Yeah. He clearly knows his part and knows his limits, and he needs Dooku probably more than Dooku needs him, especially for, this type of stuff. In fact, he even tells him that when he wakes him up in the middle of the night when they were going to go to the Bogan collection, he says, we need to do this. We need to do this now. Like, come on, dude, you have to come with me. There's nobody else that can do this. You are, you're the one, that kind of thing. So
I can't do it without you, I think he says, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, so definitely kind of a mischievous aspect of it. And I'm trying to think, like, in the rest of the novel, if we get that. We definitely get it in spades early on in this scene and some of the other stuff. But more than, I guess, we don't really get that anywhere else, maybe. I think we get
not explicitly, but we get an idea of it once he is apprenticed to Lean Castana. Maybe it's not mischievous activity, but it's this sense of adventure, this sense of looking for the artifacts, right? The kind of the forbidden knowledge side of it. So we're definitely suggested that this is what they are doing probably most of the time through their apprenticeship as they're preparing. And as the conversations with Dooku, as I start bringing Dooku into that, we definitely get an idea that they've been on the hunt for these relics, because we know that Castana is, and we know that she is in constant disagreement with Yoda about the value of the objects, as well as the amount of effort and what the potential downside of finding them, or of this kind of insane quest, this obsession almost to go and find all these artifacts and to explore their meaning. She has found an apprentice that fits that mold. And I think that's exactly why she chose him as an apprentice, because of, for example, like the Bogan collection, she shows up and she sees them, and then she starts teasing this out of these two kids and finds the one that she thinks is going to join her on that quest as much as anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, there was an interesting line from her too, and I wondered if this may not be related, but early on when she drops off that little couple chapters, as she says, of the Jedi beasts, or I'm sorry, the Sith beasts, the Sith, what were they called? I forget now.
The bestiary or something
like that. But she dropped it in his lap, and of course Dooku picks it up and looks at it, and that's when he starts kind of putting two to two together and thinking that she's a Sith Lord of some type, or Sith Lady, excuse me, of some type. And in the middle of them fighting, he brings it up and says, "Why did you leave that for me?" And she's like, why do you think it was for you? And it almost feels like that may have been part of her test. I think she was trying to get a sense of where this guy stood and all that. I think she recognized there was darkness within Dooku, But I also wonder too if that was a way for her to kind of just test the waters to see if this is really the person that maybe she would be showing interest in later on, and maybe because Dooku, decided to take up arms with her, that was kind of a deciding factor in why she chose Sifo-Dyas over him. This is all pure headcanon. There's nothing in it.
No, I think that fits, right? Because he's not ready to accept it, and it's not clear where his path is. But Sifo knew what those were as soon as they started reading through it.
Yeah.
Clearly, he's already exposed to it in some way. And again, it might just be where they choose to spend their time. Dooku is spending a lot of time perfecting saber forms, right, as well as research. But Sifo clearly has other hobbies that he's not shared with Dooku quite as much, since he's already aware of what these words mean and the translations of them.
Yeah.
So you're right. I could see where Kastana would be leaving it for Sifo to see if he understands it, and Dooku just happened to get in the way.
Exactly. Let's fast forward just a little bit here. We get to a point in this novel book story where we meet Dooku up again, and this is a little bit later in life. I think he's got a beard because Sifo-Dyas is kind of poking at fun about his beard. Yeah, this is where he makes a comment about being regal, but you get the sense that Sifo-Dyas is much more adventurous now. He's been running around with Kastana on all kinds of crazy missions, and he pulls out a little crystal, I think, that he got from Palek, I think is the planet that he mentioned. And this is where this whole vision things, because he hands over that crystal, and he says it's not Kyber, but we don't need to focus on the crystal itself, but it was interesting enough. It's kind of he threw this thing in there, and we don't get anything more from it. But he mentions that Sifo-Dyas tells Dooku to focus on the vibrations in the cortex, and it's in the middle of that when he's like kind of feeling it that suddenly Sifo-Dyas just goes into this screaming bout. Right, it's the first onset of all of these visions that he has, or how he tries to deal with them. And from that point on, this is a kind of a running theme throughout the rest of the novel. He is just completely tormented and troubled by the visions that come with him. And Kastana takes it upon herself. I mean, Lin Kastana is his master, but she's almost willingly and openly accepted this challenge of trying to ensure that these episodes don't get so bad that she needs to go to the council and let them know for fear of what they would do. And we'll touch on that here in a little bit. But there was a lot of these that happened to him over the course of the rest of the book, which I think was an interesting aspect, especially when you kind of tie that now into what we saw in the Clone Wars, right? And certainly what we see in the movie, and why this starts kind of giving into a reason as to why he put the clone army together, or put the order in for the clone army, which again, we'll get to here in just a minute. But let's talk about that first vision, because there was a lot going on there. And I think we talked about this in the last episode. I really thought he was kind of talking about the end of Endor, the end of Alderaan, or maybe Hosnian Prime, that kind of thing. It turned out to be a totally different planet. But this is the whole visions thing and being as powerful as they are. This was a little unexpected for me, I guess.
Lean had said that when this happened in front of Dooku, apparently it had been going on for a little while. We don't get any idea of what was actually, was it the same vision or it was something different, but this one was much clearer than the rest. Mm-hmm. And again, we summarized a little bit last time, but he saw the fire and the screaming and millions of people dying. He was able to describe very loosely the planet, but it took all of the masters in order to really extract out of it. But it was curious that this was the first time that she brought Sifo to the council and shared what was going on. And their reaction was interesting, I thought, because it wasn't, they basically, they didn't agree with that he was having a vision, right? They kind of disputed it, and they were trying to keep it at arm's length a little bit.
Yeah.
But then they slowly warmed to it to at least explore it, to understand what it was that he was getting to. And it kind of gives you an idea of what the council has been exposed to, that there haven't been visions or prophets or any of that for a very long time. And glimpses of the future are, again, always in motion, and they try not to put too much stock in that, live in the living force, that type of thing. But when it was presented to them, they were really confused about what to do. But the anguish and the pain that he was going through as he experienced this and just consuming him, and like we saw later in the book, it basically would paralyze him at times. I don't understand why that wasn't more concerning for them from a care perspective, less so than a, demonizing type of deal, like you're possessed or something like that. But, and just be able to, care and take some sort of ownership over the health of this kid who is clearly struggling to contain this. And they wanted to basically sweep it under the rug. And you can start to see that Sifo and Lean's trust issues and their willingness to keep this on the side seemed pretty warranted, especially as it continued to get worse. Although you can make a strong argument that all the more reason to take it to the council and have them help. And there's a conversation that I'd like to revisit with some of that about what the argument is when, why they're not helping. I think in general, though, you could start to see why these trust issues exist and why they're not going to go do this, because quite honestly, they just don't believe you. They cast it out.
Yeah. I mean, they
don't understand it.
Right. No, when Sifo-Dyas and Kastana first approach the council, they start asking questions. They're not even there. And you get the sense that they're not really interested in his health and his well-being, right? They just want to know what they want. They're asking these very clarifying questions about what's going on. And then when they finally realize that there's smoke here, they shut it down. Like Yoda shuts it down completely. He says misleading visions can be. Never certain the future is. Meditate on this, we must. And that's when she's like, forget this. In fact, she says the council is wrong. And that's when she walks out. She's pissed off because they're not going to listen to him. They've asked all these clarifying questions. They narrowed it down to Proto Branch, and they don't really want to do anything about it. They just want to kind of, again, duck their heads and let it go, that kind of thing. And we see them turn around because they end up showing up a little bit later on Proto Branch after everything has happened, which is just fuels Kastana even more and fuels Dooku even more. That's when Dooku gets fired up because, when they get down to the planet, everything happens as Sifo-Dyas had predicted. There are, kids and lives in danger. There's the hospital that they go into. There's a rescue mission that they go to. And they go through all of this. And still, the council just seems kind of, laissez-faire about it. And that's when Dooku's like fired up. We could have prevented this. We could have stopped all this if we just listened to Sifo-Dyas, which you guys didn't want to do. That in itself was kind of a pivotal moment both for Kastana and for Dooku, and I think it strengthens their relationship and kind of it leads into us getting out to the other planet where the pirates are, and then that whole thing will come to here in a bit. But
we start to see this almost motherly relationship, for Sifo. Especially later on, where she is clearly a mother figure in that, because she feels like she's got to care for him completely. But a question I had for you though is, if the council were to actually give a little bit of credence to this and say, "Wow, you were right," and I guess this is primarily Yoda since he witnessed it. "Wow, you were right. We should definitely take Sifo back and," I don't know what's the right word, study him of what's going on. What do you think that would do, knowing that supposedly there's this special correctional unit for the Force crazies called the Citadel with foresight, these things that maybe they don't understand. Do you think that was a path that would have been taken had they actually wanted to learn more about it? Or do you think it would have been more about like what they did in the chambers, where they had kind of a laying of hands? And we saw a little bit of this in the Lost Missions with Yoda too, when he started having visions. It was actually very linked up with that scene. When I watched that, I was like, oh, this is kind of one of those parallel type of things.
Yeah. I think if you
think it'd be more of that, or you think it'd be the Citadel?
Well, if you had asked me that question like 2 years ago, I would have said, there's no way. This is, they're above this. They wouldn't do something like that. That said, especially what I know now, and maybe I'm just a little bit more jaded and still ticked off about what happened in this one in Master and Apprentice, I don't know that I would put it past the council to do it. Now, I don't think they would necessarily lock him up and he'd be a prisoner, so to speak, in that sense. But contained and for their use, I don't know that I would put that above them. And this kind of goes to the question of how did he get on the council to begin with? My theory, or at least my hypothesis, is that they put him on the council because the alternative would be to lock him up in the Citadel, right? And that doesn't really feel like the Jedi way. But they probably do want to keep a close eye on him. they want to make sure that they stay engaged and that he's involved. And so that, if something like this were to happen again, where the sky is falling literally, and they want to be able to act upon it, or at least be given the opportunity to act upon it, then the next best thing would be to get this guy as close as they can to him. And what better way to do that than throw him on the council? And that's my theory, is that this is the only reason they put him on the council, was because he had these visions, and they finally believed that they were as strong, even though they may not have acknowledged it. They wanted him there as a resource, just in case they ever need to. I mean, they sent this poor sap off to Proto Branch. He was unstable to begin with, and then he gets out there and he has another bout, and he's basically just towed around like Weekend at Bernie's the rest of that little mission until the very end, when he comes out and he's all conscious again. So, I mean, he was at risk, and they still didn't even care. They let him just go ahead and take off. So he seems like somebody that doesn't tick all the boxes in terms of what you would expect somebody on the Jedi Council to be, with the exception of this crazy talent that he has to be able to see the future, which I think would be hugely beneficial to the Jedi Council, whether they would like to admit it or not.
See, and I'm wondering if he was able to finally control them. So we're skipping around a little bit, but when Jenza is describing what was going on in the final battle on Sereno, or on Sereno itself, not the moon, right? The actual planet. Yeah. She says that his sanity cracked forever, right? When he was having this really intense vision of and what was coming true with Dooku and all of that. And I'm wondering at that point, because usually sometimes when you have that fracture, sometimes maybe that puts things back in focus and you're actually able to somewhat focus and maintain, or maybe something new has opened up to him at that point to where he can actually channel these things and maybe maintain some sort of coherency, or maintain or control the experience of the vision. Or maybe he just learned to do that over time as he achieved masterhood, because he's with the council he's with the Jedi for a long time after this book, of course.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if he just was able to finally control it to where that since they never shared anything else with the council, no one's around to understand everything that he sees and has been experiencing, that he's able to control it, or maybe they just limit the interactions with the council. But these things were pretty random. So having a seat in the chamber seems like a risky move, unless you have some way of controlling these episodes, or really these almost seizures, these seizure moments of prophecy and visions.
Yeah. So that's a good point. And I think maybe just to kind of touch on that, you could have a scenario where Yoda, as much as Yoda says we shouldn't be following the future, he tends to dwell on it. He tends to look into it, at least. I don't think he acts upon it. And that's kind of the key differentiator here. Right. Being able to see the future and acting upon it is completely different than just seeing it and acknowledging it, kind of like to Qui-Gon Jinn's point from Master and Apprentice, letting it happen. But I wonder if, even if he was able to control them, if he was in close contact with Yoda, if Yoda wasn't seeing it and Sifo-Dyas comes and says, hey, I just had a vision about this, maybe that was enough for Yoda to work off of, right? And kind of get there to where he would be able to finally see it, even though he may not act on it. I just think he's a huge resource, and I think they would probably want to keep him on the council for that reason. I cannot see any other reason why. He wasn't the best Jedi in terms of his abilities, his power, that kind of thing. He was certainly knowledgeable, and that he was this little archaeologist guy running around collecting, Sith artifacts and learning about lore and that kind of thing. But beyond that, I mean, you didn't get the sense, at least from this story, that there was all that much there for him to be of the caliber that you would expect to be on the Jedi Council. Again, with the exception of this one exceptional power in the ability to kind of see the future.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So I've touched on the question about why he's on the council, but do you have any other, I guess, thoughts or any difference of opinion as to why he would be on the council that we haven't already touched on?
No, I think that's really about it. And again, it is confusing because, like you said, he doesn't exemplify anything else that's overly special, but he seemed like he was a very reasonable person. Mm-hmm. He seemed to listen to a lot of perspectives. So maybe he was just someone who welcomed a lot of opinion and was able to make a very sound choice. And those types of things make very good masters. And you could argue that type of personality would work on the council, right? Of being able to work with others and also try to do what's best for the galaxy. And clearly he cares and wants to help other parts of the galaxy as well. So I think you can make some arguments just he's a good person, it seems. at least in this moment of time.
Yeah.
To be able to do that.
Yeah.
Did you have something else that was even further fetched?
No.
Okay.
That's about as crazy I got there.
I'm never really sure with you.
Yep.
So maybe it's a good time to go talk about Asusto a little bit, because that really sets the stage for really the rest of his life and what we've kind of come to expect from the movies and even some of the Clone Wars episodes.
Yeah. And this is all the visions that he had of Order 66. And, we talked about a little bit about this, but during those moments, especially with both him and Dooku, right, we got the sense that he was well aware of the of Order 66, of Palpatine coming into power, or somebody coming into power at least. So we could hear those voices in the visions that they both shared. There was the alternative vision that I think, was that Dooku that had that, or did they both have it?
We just saw it from Dooku's perspective. Right?
Yeah, where the Council, or the Jedi were in power. But from all of this,
we know that Lean shared it though, because I think she mentioned it in the Jedi overthrowing or something like that.
Yeah. Good point. So from all of that, it kind of brings up this question about whether or not Sifo-Dyas actually put in the order for the clones. Because I will say that you roll back to the Attack of the Clones, and we get this like almost offhanded comment that Kenobi makes, we find out that it's not Kenobi, but whoever it was, I think it was the Kaminoans or Kaminoans.
Kaminoans?
Sure, Kaminoans. Thank you. It's Tonley. Darn it! I should have wrote her name down.
Tom Way.
Thank you.
It's been a while since we've thought of these names.
I know we haven't, and I didn't write this down. So
Prime Minister,
so she makes a comment about how Sifo-Dyas the order was put in by that person, and it's not really out there, right? But it was intriguing. It's certainly, when I remember watching the movie the first time, I thought, Sifo-Dyas, who's this guy? And there was originally going to be, George Lucas is on record saying if you watch the DVD commentary, DVD, not Blu-ray, but the original DVD commentary for Attack of the Clones, there's a moment in there when they're kind of talking about that line. And he says that you're going to hear more about Sifo-Dyas, or we'll explore that in Revenge of the Sith, which obviously never happened. They kind of pulled all of that out and took it out. But that line was in there just to kind of plant that seed that more of this story would come. And because we didn't get it, it was kind of cool that Filoni and group went back to kind of revisit this, and certainly what we're getting from here. But I guess my point is, when we first saw that, I never once believed, at least in Attack of the Clones, that it was indeed somebody named Sifo-Dyas. In fact, and just to kind of touch on what the original intent was, that name was supposed to be Palpatine's name, right? It was actually Palpatine who was under the pseudo of somebody named Sifo-Dyas, or maybe there was a variation of the word Sifo-Dyas. But I didn't believe it for the second. And even like in the Clone Wars, when we finally get to the Clone Wars animated series, I had always been under the impression that this person really never put this in, that it was either Tyrannus, Dooku, or it was Palpatine, Sidious, that put that order in, just using that name as an alibi to kind of do all of that, right? And yet,
assuming their identity.
Yeah, right. Assuming their identity. And this is kind of this is canon. And this is completely different, because I think after all of the visions and after what we hear Sifo-Dyas go through, and how clear a lot of this stuff was, and we know how he was really trying to prevent a lot of this stuff from happening, there's very good reason to think that he actually did put this order in after all.
It sure seems like it. And what we learned from the conspiracy episode of the Clone Wars, actually, let's dial back just a little bit back to the Sereno. So while the battle is finishing up, we start to have Sifo-Dyas just rambling, right? Dooku is the great divider and great armies, and just we get this preview of what we know is the Clone Wars and what's coming. And so we get with Asusto, and then with this, we have a very clear picture starting to form. And he even says it. The picture is coming into focus. Not only is this becoming true of Dooku, but everything else now seems very, very plausible to happen. So we assume that these things continue to happen. And in Conspiracy, again, this is season 6 of Clone Wars, we get Mace Windu's and Plo Koon's account of Sifo-Dyas, because he's been dead for 10 years, right? From Clone Wars. So we know that, or from Attack of the Clones. So we don't know exactly how that all fit timeline-wise until really these moments in these episodes. They start to describe a little bit to Obi-Wan and Anakin that they judged his ideas, too extreme. and was really worried about basically, and we learned this a little bit from the Kaminoans as well, of a safeguard against rogue Jedi was really how he sold it to the Kaminoans. But the Jedi Council they were like, no, this is just not possible. Why would you need a grand army? There's no need for this. It was very much the same kind of Yoda that we got in Dooku Jedi Lost of, there's no need to learn about the Sith. There's no need to explore any of that. They're dead. Why would we want to go back there?
Yeah, it's never going to happen.
Never going to happen, right? Even though that's what they excel at. And so this is it gave us an idea that he had to have been, the intensity and the frequency had to have been increasing while he was on the council. And then he finally either had an episode in front of them or started to actually tell them and say, look, this is, I keep seeing this over and over and over. Look, I did Proto Branch. I've had these other things. And what do? They kind of behave the same way they did when he was younger, and basically tell him that, no, and you shouldn't be on the council anymore because you're crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of how it sounded.
No, I was going to say, I think to touch on both the what's his name, Mace Windu, when they're kind of talking about his views, right? That has different meaning for me now, having listened to Dooku Jedi Lost, because I just saw that as, well, actually, I don't know what that was, apart from, I don't think I really had any kind of context around what that line was at the time. But now, for me, it takes on a meaning, at least, if not a different meaning. But it takes on the meaning that I really get the impression that maybe he had gotten to the point with these visions where it was more than just, here's what's going to happen. At some point, you got to think, if he was constantly having these and he was just being tormented by them, he would want that to stop. And the best way to kind of help this stop, or at least help ease some of that pain and the agony, would be to take action on them, right? And I think that's where he probably started going against the grain with the Jedi Council. It was more than just having episodes and predicting the future. But if there were moments in there that we didn't see where he was actually acting on them, or trying to prevent the future, or trying to, interfere with future events, that kind of thing, I think that's when Yoda and Mace Windu and the Jedi Council would pump the brakes and say, whoa, this guy is getting a little too extreme. He's wanting to go out and do these things that we shouldn't be doing, and we need to, put him aside and really get him off the council and lock him up in the Citadel or wherever he ends up going, other than death. But
we also see, maybe this is the opening that Dooku was looking for as well, right?
Yeah.
Where these are dark side tendencies.
Yep.
So Plo Koon tells us that, he foresaw this great conflict, and so we have to raise an army. Well, then you can argue that that's probably a bad idea too. But if you're going to go out and do it, Dooku at this time, again, no one really quite knows that he is flirting with the dark side. We don't know of his relationship with the hooded man and things like that. We don't know how much of that is already in place, but clearly Dooku and Palpatine have already synced up, at least on some level. Palpatine has exposed who he is to Dooku, and now they see this opportunity, and they're either enabling or they're just watching Sifo go and do some of these things. I kind of speculate that I think that Dooku is probably enabling some of this as well, because we know that he has a grand fortune behind him with this new ore that they discovered. They're processing on themselves. Sereno presumably has returned itself to its rightful status in the galaxy, to paraphrase the book. There's no way that Sifo-Dyas could have funded this to the Kaminoans, because all they take is cold hard cash.
Mm-hmm.
So he has to have something of value, some sort of security, in order to start this project, because Jedi are presumably poor, right? They don't have money except for what they got to do to get around the galaxy.
Sure.
Dooku and Palpatine probably have, well, I mean, you're right. I mean, the council probably has a ton of money, but anyway, but Dooku and Palpatine have money to spend, right? And at least in adventures like this, or ventures like this. So presumably he had teamed up with them in some way in order to help fund this until his usefulness started to run out.
Right.
He's got his name on it. What's interesting about that is because the Kaminoans still equate Tyrannus as a Jedi. They think they're all Jedi. They don't know the difference. And that's kind of how I got to that conclusion of, they must have been there in person together, or at least as a pair in person. But Sifo was the front man, and Tyrannus was just the supporter in it.
Yeah. He was a financial backer, right?
Right.
It's almost kind of like a role reversal, right? To some extent, because I don't think Dooku. Well, maybe not. I guess
He doesn't get his hands dirty though, right?
Yeah.
Dooku always has somebody else doing the dirty work, except in very, very specific, special circumstances, like we saw in the Lost Ones episode.
Yeah. Yeah, and then his unfortunate death comes at the hands of the Pikes. So they end up paying the Pikes in it to kind of bring down a shuttle that both Sifo-Dyas and I forget the other guy's name.
Silman, I think.
Yeah, Silman. That's
He's
right.
an aide to Chancellor Valorum at the time.
Yeah. So that ship comes down. We get his death there, and I think that's I'm getting my wires crossed here, but I think that's the episode that opens with Plo Koon kind of going through the rubble, and they find his lightsaber.
Right.
But yeah, and so again, it is Tyrannus, Dooku of all people, that orders that shuttle to kind of shot down, killing him, which seems pretty tragic. I mean, of course, if you listen to Dooku Jedi Lost, you obviously know that he wasn't above killing his own blood, his own sister, or at least having someone else do it for him. So I guess it's not hard to think that he wouldn't do this to somebody that was probably his best friend, and he cared about at some point very much so, protected him, took care of him, was kind of like an older brother to him at times. And yeah, he was okay with just shooting him down because he was no longer needed. They got everything they needed from him, and he was their alibi, got the identity, everything else they needed in order to finally execute this clone army, and they dispatched him. So poor Sifo-Dyas.
What a jerk.
What a jerk. All right, well,
But yeah, his usefulness was expended. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's par for the course. There can only be two. Sifo is a liability at that point because
he knows
we don't
so
know
much.
Yeah, right. And we don't know his sanity either of, is he able to control this now, or is he getting loose lips? He's probably, I mean, if he's gone this far to think that this is an okay action to take, then his behavior might be very unpredictable, and Palpatine is going to have none of that. This is a major milestone in the overall plan, and we need to get that moving. When it's moving, we need to take care of it. Dooku, this is your first opportunity. There was a moment when we learned that the Sith had to get, or we saw the Vader comic, right, where he had to attain a Jedi's lightsaber and make that kyber bleed for his Sith crystal,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was his transcendence of letting go of his past. I was really hoping that the lightsaber that Plo Koon found on the ship that was down in Obadiah wouldn't work or wouldn't have the crystal in it, because I think that, or I mean, you could
That'd
still
be super
argue
dark.
maybe it was swapped, because I think Dooku's was blue and the one he found was blue. But yeah, he took that one and made that one bleed, because that would be very poetic, but also very appropriate for Dooku's moment of transcendence into Sith, and to actually have his red lightsaber at the expense of his friend.
Man.
In the headcanon, we can maybe build that connection there, but we don't really have a great clear evidence of that on screen. But that would be very messed up,
Pretty dark, yeah. Thanks, Jonesy.
but also I think very appropriate.
Yeah, I would agree. I wouldn't put it past them to do something like that either. It seems par for course for these guys. I think that's probably going to do it here. I guess all in all, I would say with Sifo-Dyas, it was an interesting character. Way more. I really enjoyed him in this audiobook. And I don't think I would. I don't know that this was certainly a surprise, right? This aspect of the story was a surprise. So kudos to Mr. Scott that wrote the book,
right?
To kind of go the route of pairing these guys up early on as best friends and allowing them to kind of have this little journey together, because it was, again, unexpected, and I really enjoyed it. I wish there was probably more to the story. I think there was maybe an opportunity lost on Palpatine's part. I was thinking that maybe if he knew, as obsessed with predicting the future and being so sure of the future, and maybe that's the problem right there, but so sure of the future that as Palpatine was, that there was probably a missed opportunity on his part to just take this guy and lock him up in a citadel of some sort and just use him, right, as a slave, as a tool to kind of help predict or anticipate what was going to happen. And instead, they shot him down and killed him. But nonetheless, I thought it was an interesting aspect. I thought he was an interesting character, unexpected again. Like I said,
I think there's a character that they could still go back to and explore smaller stories of him and Castana and what are they researching? Because presumably they've got maybe 20 plus years, maybe 30 or 40 years. I don't know how many years we're talking about here of adventures and of stories to tell. And I think you don't have to build the whole arc like we did this time. We had to go all the way through Dooku's arc in 6 hours, but we could take smaller pieces of Sifo and start to learn a little bit more about where he's at and what's going on. And also keep motivating and driving the why did he feel like this was necessary? Like, what were all of the events to fit that through? And I think that would be a really interesting, I'd like to learn more about that. This was a story, I was going to ask you this question, but you kind of answered it, of whether or not this was the story you wanted to get from Sifo. It sounds like the one you got, you're pretty happy with though, but was this the one you thought you wanted going in?
No, and I mentioned this in the last episode that one of the more interesting aspects of this story overall had nothing to do with Dooku or specifically, or even Sifo-Dyas specifically, or even Castana, but it was really all the lore. And they keep dropping these names of all this stuff that these ancient relics and everything from the older Republic times, or even beyond that. That was a really intriguing piece of it all. And there's one line in there in this particular book or novel audiobook where they mentioned that there was a ramp up, right? I forget who it was. I think it was Castana who says that early on they were finding little onesie twosie kind of relics here and there, and some of them were fakes and that kind of thing, but that there was a lot more that they were suddenly coming across, and this meant something, that something was about to happen, which we come to think and believe that was the return of Palpatine and the fall of the Jedi Order. But that part was the intriguing piece. That was kind of like the lead for me that got buried in all of this, was the amount of Sith relics that were out there and artifacts that were out there, and the witchcraft piece and of the Force and all that. These are all little interesting things that we didn't really get a whole lot of in this particular novel, but I would really like to have more of. And why not throw Sifo-Dyas and Castana in there to kind of be the storytellers for us in that? Yeah,
I kind of put him in there with like a Plagueis, right? Someone that we hear referenced, and Plagueis got some time in a now Legends book, but give us more of that story so that we can fill in some of the blanks, even if it's not all the blanks, but a couple of the milestones. Really, really fun. Yeah, and I had the same kind of experience. I didn't really know what to expect from Sifo, but when I saw what kind of part he was going to play in this, I was very happy we got as much as we did. And I found myself wanting more of it because it was such an interesting story. And you just have this question about, what are they actually doing? Like, what are you doing out there? And what is it you're actually finding? And what's the meaning of what you're finding? And what are you doing with it? And a lot of potentially fun, interesting stories baked into all of that.
Well, that's where we'll end the show here. Before we go, we got a couple things we want to touch on. We got some Discord stuff to handle.
Yeah, there was a really fun. So if you haven't checked out our Discord, we certainly welcome you to do that. earglemedia.com/Discord. There's also a little button on the website. Some of the things you get to experience in there is your buddy Etox had a really great question just today, I think it was, looking to get into Clone Wars and Rebels, didn't know really much about it, and just posed a seemingly innocent question about, hey, what do you think about this and where do I start? And you really had a fantastic response. You want to summarize that for us real quick?
Yeah, it was just really, I was trying to just summarize it. I would say, if you're interested in getting into the Clone Wars and or Rebels, and you're not sure where to start, or if this is even for you, the way I summarize it was the Clone Wars is so massive in scope, with all these different characters and stories and backgrounds and a lot of context that helps kind of build upon the prequel trilogy, and to some extent the original trilogy just a little bit. That's kind of where you want to go. I think you get a new profound respect for the clone army itself, and it really enhances your viewing of Revenge of the Sith. When you get to Revenge of the Sith after watching the Clone Wars, there's so much that happens in it that just takes on a completely different meaning because you've watched the Clone Wars. With Rebels, it's a very smaller, tighter kind of a view of our characters and story. The scope is not as large. The scale is not as large, which kind of works to its advantages as well. But that really kind of sets the tone for a lot of what we're going to see in like Rogue One and the original trilogy. And there's always, I guess one of the other things that I mentioned, and there was one of the key differentiators between the two series is with the Clone Wars, you never felt like they were in dire straits or that things were, going to fall through at any time, because you kind of knew how those stories were going to play out. You kind of knew where those characters were going. And yet with Rebels, you never really got the sense of where it was going. You knew things were going to be grave at times. They were going to be desperate at times. And you always wanted to know exactly how this was going to end, because we don't see them in the original trilogy. We don't see them in the sequel trilogy. And so what happens to them, right? And so that's kind of just two very different aspects of it all. But anyways, the point of all that was come over to Discord, because those are the kind of conversations that we tend to have from time to time. And it's not just us. We've got some very more versed than we are in terms of Star Wars lore listeners and supporters that are in there that are constantly having conversations that I'm like, wow, this conversation's really intriguing, and it's probably above what I could even contribute to at this point. So I don't contribute to it. But yeah, a lot of fun. Please come join us if you have that. We'll have the link there in the show notes for you. The other, what else we got? The other thing is just a reminder, we are playing SWTOR. So we've got a guild called the Cantina Cast. It is an Empire faction on the Satil Shan server. Satil Shan server, excuse me. If you want to find me in game, I am Sindryl, Sindryl. We'll put that in the show notes as well. But feel free to reach us, ping us, let us know that you're on. And if you want to help us with any of our flashpoints or quests or whatever we're doing at the time, we'd love to have you. We've also got a Discord server that we've got with voice too, so you can jump in there and talk about SWTOR or run ops with us or whatever you want to do.
Over on the EGM front, Smoking and Drinking in Space just had a really good episode on Metropolis, the 1927 sci-fi movie that inspired a lot of Ralph McQuarrie's drawings. So I would highly recommend you check that out, see what the guys think of it. It's really tough with those old movies because trying to see it through the lens of today's movie making and some of the classic sci-fi, it's a little interesting. So I'd be curious to see what people think of that. As a reminder, it is not safe for work due to language. So just if you got kids in the car, maybe come back to it a little bit later. But Smoking and Drinking in Space, you can find it on all of the fantastic podcatchers and services, as well as over at eaglemedia.com.
Yeah, that one's a good one. I think I'm about halfway through it on it, but it's been pretty good so far. All right.
Yeah, next we're going to take a break from the main feed. But if you are a Patreon member, we're going to have a special collector's episode where I talk about the... What are you laughing about?
Just collector's episode. I think it's funny. Sorry.
What?
Well, what do you collect? I mean, I get it. It's cute. I just meant like, or we got a coin going out or a T-shirt or something that they get with it, or is just an episode?
No, collect like people that collect stuff.
Oh, okay.
Goodness great. This isn't complicated. It's a collect. All right, gosh, whatever. I talk about the Sideshow 6-scale Obi-Wan Kenobi mythos figure.
I gotcha. It's a collect. Okay. You're saying it's an episode about collecting. You're not saying that the episode is worth collecting.
Well, none of our stuff is worth collecting.
That's why I was laughing. I'm like,
we collect it so no one else has to.
I'm stupid. Never mind. Just keep going, Jonesy.
Right. It's not a collector's edition or anything like that.
Right.
Anyway, I love this figure and I talk a little bit about it. So we'll release that in place of the normal next Tuesday. It'll be out there. So if you want to check it out on Patreon, it's as little as $1. You can do it and then check it out and take off if you want. But highly encourage everyone to go check it out. It's a lot of fun. It's a great figure. We'll talk about it for just a little bit.
Man, I'm so jealous of that figure. I've always liked that figure, honestly. So pretty cool.
I love it.
Yep.
It's really, really cool.
Really good job on it. All right. And then finally, I promise, and then we'll leave you alone. So we will be back, I guess, in about 2 weeks with another episode. Jonesy's gone on vacation, not me. He's the guy with all the money, but he's going to be leaving for us.
It's always my fault.
It's always his fault.
It's not Disney this time.
It's not
folks.
Disney, but he is taking a little vacation. So we'll take a break. And when we come back, we're going to hit up the Age of Rebellion comics. So we've had a chance to talk about the Republic comics. The Rebellion comics will almost all be out with the exception of Vader. I think it's going to be out like the day after we record. So we will put together a collection of those. So expect that to probably be 1 or 2 episodes, depending on how far we want to get into some of these. But we'll be visiting characters like Han, Luke, Leia, Lando Calrissian, Grand Moff Tarkin, Darth Vader's in there, yada, yada. So tons of characters. We'll break those down for you guys and touch on some of the highlights and stuff that we think they're probably more relevant and intriguing for you all as well. So, all right. With that, we will take a 2-week break. Jonesy, any final words before you head off on your lovely cruise, airline, road trip, whatever you're doing?
Going to a dance competition.
Oh, never mind.
It's none of the above. It's barely a vacation,
Oh.
just to be clear.
All right. Well, that's the
I don't know.
best way to end it.
Even a concierge has got to rest.
Yeah, that's right. All right. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
You're still listening? Wow. That's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.